My name is Nico Misleh. I am a family nurse practitioner by trade. I am the proud owner and founder of HRT University and Apollo Health Optimization, which is my clinic. Again, HRT University is more on the educational side, so teaching other providers how to implement hormone replacement therapy into their practices. So I wouldn't say I probably had a strategy, which is probably my biggest downfall. I'm a big vision guy, and I'd like to think that I'm really creative, but I'm not very good at implementing operations and creating strategies and systems all the time. I usually just am kind of like, I'll go with the flow and do whatever I want to do or need to do. That works pretty good, but you can only kill things and drag it home for so long before you just kind of get burnt out. And maybe sometimes your content feels a little bit stagnant or kind of stale or the same. So, that's kind of where I was at for a while. And I also knew, I was really fortunate to be in a position where I said, okay, I probably don't need to do this on my own, and I probably ought to not be the one who's doing this. So having the opportunity to be able to say, okay, I think I'm ready to take someone on who can also, be a part of this with me, help me strategize, help me create some systems, help me to actually produce really high quality content. I think that would be a win-win. For me, the biggest deciding factor was probably, and I mean, this is a little bit esoteric, but probably Evan's personality and his own kind of brand and image. Sherelle and I, my wife, who's also owns and runs HRT University with me. Again, we're creative folks, and we're really, really, really intentional about the way we show up. And I'm not saying that other people aren't, but I think there's always this pull to, like, as human beings, we're kind of lazy and like, what's the easiest way I can do this or the cheapest way I could do this? And sometimes that just kind of comes off as sloppy. And I think that you know it when you see it in terms of content. And so we didn't want that. We wanted something that brought more meaning and purpose to the table. And that's a huge part of our brand and stuff, especially with HRT University. So, when it comes to working with someone or with a company, it always is a gut check for us of like, does this person or brand separate from ours actually kind of align with ours in some weird way? Is there some cohesion? Is this person going to, be flexible enough to, hey, I'm going to let your brand shine, but I also want to help direct you and show you like maybe some of the shortfalls and stuff. So that was really important. So again, Evan was kind of the right person to say, you know what, and it was very clear, like he understood the mission, he understood the purpose. It was very clear from his own brand, like, watching his videos and stuff, which again was helpful for us too, right? Like getting to see like, what has Evan done and what has he worked on? I was referred to Evan by a really good friend of mine, Justin Gross, who a lot of you may even know. But even watching his content and the stuff that he had produced with Evan, was phenomenal. And so again, for us, it felt like a no-brainer, and finally felt like we were actually getting something that was again more than just a transactional kind of relationship, more like okay, like we're really all in this together. I think the speed of the content, that's one thing, especially when you're just a busy clinic owner or business owner or whatever it is you're doing. Having some amount of speed is always necessary. You don't want speed in terms of like, this is sloppy and we're just trying to get out as quick as possible. But you do want a turnaround time of like, hey, this is relevant. And every now and then you have something that just is like, I need this to be done. This kind of fell on my lap and it's really important. And that was a really nice, I mean, again, from a tangible perspective, it was just always like, yep, you got it. No problem. We'll put this out. And the quality is always there. It's always like 10 out of 10, even if it's like, hey, I worked on this for a week or I worked on this for 10 minutes to get it over to you. That was great. Even from like again, it's hard to find someone who can nail a lot of things at the same time. So you'll find people who are like really good at video or really good at audio, but maybe their, kind of graphic design piece is not amazing. And so that is always like a challenge. Historically, that's always been a challenge for us. And Evan's always been able to like nail that really quickly too. But again, I think that speaks to Evan being able to holistically see the brand itself and understand that brand. whether it's HRT University or the Restore Clinic or whatever he's working on, it's very clear that like that he allows that to shine in all the kind of deliverables. Yeah, I would say for me, again, coming from a space of, I don't want to do things that look sloppy or cheap or hokey or cheesy or any of that kinds of stuff. My long-term goal has always been whatever we're producing and putting out there into the universe, which is now public for thousands of people, maybe millions of people to see someday. I don't ever want to look back and think I just did that for clicks or for likes or for, it's like a cheap hat trick kind of thing. I really wanted it to have that evergreen type of feel. So, whether it's 10, 20, 50 years down the road, I look back at, maybe it was a little video or a really long podcast I did. I always wanted to look back and just be proud of that work. I wanted it to have that timeless feel to it again, where it wasn't like, again, so just a fad or something that's really popular here and now. So for me, it's always been important, whether it is a short form content that's maybe just going to be seen by, maybe a few hundred, maybe 1,000 people once ever, to kind of my long form content that, potentially could be seen by many people. The quality of the content is exactly the same pound for pound. So again, and I urge a lot of people, if you're looking to work with someone, that really ought to be something you're really focusing on, because again, so much of us we're always working in this like, for the next week or the next month or the next 3 months. But if you really start to zoom back and say, you know what, I need to have this be amazing for years, maybe decades, then all of a sudden your mindset should shift to, I need to be working with someone who understands that too, and we're not just chasing virality, because again, it's just a short game in potentially this long cycle of your business. There's so many layers to that. Some of the really obvious things. We get complimented all the time with, for example, my setup right now. If you're watching this video, potentially Evan helped us hey, how do we do the lighting and what camera and what microphone and what this and that? How do we make sure the quality looks good? And so it's funny, even if I'm just hopping on a quick Zoom meeting with a colleague or something, almost always the first thing out of their mouth is like, wow, it looks really good, man. That's really sharp. I wish mine looked like that, which is a huge compliment because, again, it's not an easy thing to do. And I would have never been able to do this on my own. So little things like that up to, I've been to recently a conference, it wasn't too long ago, where I had someone who I'd never met before, come up to me and say, hey man, I love your podcast. It rules. It's really great. I watch all your videos, been following you for a while, and your video just keeps improving and improving and improving. And, someday I hope to have a podcast like that and video like that. That is so huge to me because, again, I'm small fish in many ways, but that's such a special feeling, getting to know that okay, there's some impact here. And again, coming from my own personal perspective, the words that I'm saying and the ideas that are coming out, of course, that ought to be the highlight of the content that I'm producing, but in no way, shape, or form should it end there. I feel like, if I'm speaking these really powerful, meaningful things that I think is really true, I would hope that my video and lighting and sound quality match for that, right? Because there's nothing more disappointing than, man, that guy said something great, but God, it's so hard for me to listen to, or it's so visually unappealing. I've watched those videos and thought, gosh, that's really disappointing. So I love having that continuity and seamlessness in everything we do. I would say that, again, I've historically attempted to even work with other people to help with some of my video production and presentations and things of that nature. And I'm very fortunate that some of that stuff comes to me pretty naturally. But what I will tell you is that almost always when I've attempted, let's say, to work with other people, they've always kind of pushed me towards, well, this is what everybody else is doing. Right. And again, virality is just a great topic of conversation, because I'm not saying that virality couldn't help. Of course it could. But at the end of the day, if that's really what you're chasing, it's a kind of a shotgun dream. And if it even happens, it doesn't guarantee anything. So when you meet someone like Evan who can kind of understand yo, look, if you go viral, fantastic. It's not going to hurt us. But at the same time, recognize that, what is actually the vision and mission of your business. If it is in fact to be the best at what you're doing and you want to be around for many, many years to come, why chase these rainbows and butterflies when we could actually create stuff that's, again, that's highlighting your brand, right? Because Evan saw what exactly we were looking for, and even producing previous, and he was like, hey, we can continue to double down on that. You don't have to be worried about that, but we can also maybe make some strategy around how we do that. So for example, maybe, if you're presenting on a topic, maybe don't do that topic 20 times in a row. Maybe we talk about some business stuff, or break it up with maybe some personal anecdotes. And then, we can come in with a really science heavy conversation. That, like, again, those little things are always helpful, because for me, I'm really good at just hanging out in my own bubble, and maybe not taking, again, that 10,000-foot view of, okay, there's probably some other ways we could enhance, the aspects of the video and the quality that we're doing. This question is probably one of my favorite questions, because first and foremost, I'm just one of those people. I don't understand the like, let's hire someone from the Philippines, and then this person from India, and then this person over here in Brazil. Like, I understand if it works for some people, fantastic, but I'm a big fan of, again, my brand and business and mission and purpose should really be reflected across the spectrum, not just externally to people just looking outside in, but even internally for even my own employees and other contractors and stuff. Like, it should be very obvious that quality over quantity is really what we're all about. Okay. So again, the piecemealing thing is, I can't ever see a situation in which that is more optimal. Again, look at your company and brand very holistically and create systems around that. So we're kind of protecting it in a way, right? We're creating a moat of sorts where, now you can, really jump into what you're producing in the content without having to worry whether or not this person's going to nail it, or whether or not this person really understands the mission, because there's a language barrier, or, again, you're paying pennies on the dollar for this person to produce probably, what would be pennies on the dollar material and content. So for me, it's like, look, your deliverable is everything, right? I don't know who said it, probably many people out there in the universe, but we're all in the game of producing some amount of content, whether you like it or not, now in business. And so why would that key aspect of your business, the marketing and the public facing stuff, why would you want that to be the cheapest part of your company? I dare say even the most affordable part of your business. I mean, any good business owner knows that ought to be where probably most of your money is getting put back into. So that's how I've always looked at that. And again, I encourage a lot of people to really evaluate that too. If you're really pursuing excellence, then hire excellent people. I think that most people, it's funny. I think there's always two parts of us. There's one part of us who is like the biggest, strongest, most smartest version of ourselves, and we look down on people on Instagram and TikTok who are saying really outrageous things with no actual validity or claims. They have no degrees, they have no nothing, and it's easy for us to say, oh, how dare these people talk about that, and I know so much more, and why do they get all the fame and glory and stuff. And then on the other side, so we have this like grandiose version of ourselves. On the other side, we also have this really meek, small version of ourselves who's like, well, I'm not really that good on camera. Or maybe I don't speak very well, or maybe I don't know it as much as I think I do. And right, that kind of, self-doubt creeping in. I think it's funny because, again, it highlights just how we are as human beings. I've always encouraged, my own, be they students or colleagues or things of that nature, like, look, you have to stop thinking of yourself in such a small way. We're not asking you to be, the next Steve Jobs necessarily. But again, what does that even mean? Like, do you have to be known by millions of people, or how about just your community of people? How about just your patients, your several hundred, maybe 1,000 if you're lucky, people who really look up to you and respect you, and they love the sound of your voice and the way you look and the way you hold yourself? Like, why couldn't we highlight those things and actually stand out in the crowd. And again, you're not necessarily in direct competition with these loudmouths. They're always going to be there and they're never going to go away. But you're rather in competition for people who recognize that, this is just a loudmouth. And maybe I'm looking for someone who actually does have the credibility and the authenticity and the genuine character, the person who's actually going to really take care of me and understand my problems very deeply. What about someone who I can create a personal connection with? I think that's what our customers are always seeking and looking for, and it might take them a little bit to find you, but they're certainly never going to find you if you never speak up, if you never put something out there. It's extremely daunting. I'm preaching from the choir, so to speak, or preaching to the choir. I never really wanted to be a massive voice, so to speak. But at the same time, I recognized, if I keep playing super small, then I'm going to lose to someone or something that I really don't love, and I don't love it for those people who get swindled in or suckered into something that they didn't want. I really do think it's kind of like that drive that you should have to provide excellence to your clients or your customers or your patients or whoever they might be. I would say that if you've successfully nailed down some version of a brand, what I mean by that is, again, I'm not talking about like Apple level product brand marketing here. I'm talking about, in your local community, whether you're brick and mortar or even telehealth, like in that ecosystem, you have a name for yourself. You're getting really, really good and very consistent word of mouth referrals, because that's where most of your business is going to come from, like 95% of it, especially when you first start out. And you've made enough money to support yourself, which is, I think, really important. Like, please make sure that you have enough money to support yourself and your family. Once you've nailed those things down, I think a lot of business owners are now stuck with like, okay, I'm making money. I'm making enough money to support myself. In fact, I've got some money on the side here. What in the world should I do with it? Again, in my humble opinion, you ought to put it back into your business, because your business has so much more room to grow. So please don't stick it in some savings account just yet. I'm not saying don't save, but I'm saying don't save all of it. Please take some of that and apply it elsewhere in the business. And in my humble opinion, I think it ought to be utilized in marketing. And marketing, again, can look like a lot of different things. But if you've already, again, probably established a really good brand, it probably means that you have some form of a email newsletter, which again is super simple and free and easy to set up and do. You might even have some amount of like an organic reach. Maybe it's just via Facebook or social media stuff, posts and things like that. But maybe now you're looking for a little bit more depth to that. We're talking now. We need people to recognize us as an actual authority figure beyond just the word of mouth referrals. Like I need someone in a totally different world to be able to see me, whether that's on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, and recognize me as that authority figure. So I think when you've kind of nailed those things down, I think it's a great opportunity to then consider, okay, who can I hire on to help me in this journey? How can I appropriately systematize this? How can I make sure that this is scalable, right? Because again, let's just say you nail it right off the bat and you're growing. You need help. You're really going to need help. You're going to need help taking off the load of editing and filming and blah, 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 like all these big things that require a lot of time, which you're probably not an expert at. I think that's a great opportunity to consider hiring on someone like Evan, who's just immediately, again, going to be able to enter into your ecosystem and say, hey, I understand the components here. Let me help enhance those components or maybe add some components. And then how can we work out a plan that makes the most sense, right? Because you might still be in a really early growing stage, but you're growing, or maybe you're making millions of dollars and you can tackle a whole lot more work. But, I think that's going to be a really good time and place for those of you, especially who are still on that earlier phase of growing, to consider putting some time and money into that general space of your business. Anytime someone says I'm too busy, I always think, well, I'm too busy too. We're all too busy. Busy is just it's an excuse for, I probably have time. I probably just haven't made the time, right? So I try to tell people who are like, yo, I don't know how I'm going to get around to that. I look at them and say a couple things. Number one, we can always find time. We almost always can. In fact, if you're spending time on other things and not marketing, like what are you really doing for your business? Like again, marketing ought to be probably your like number one concern outside of just the operational side. Um, if you feel like time is a problem, create time. And because I'm saying that, and I mean this genuinely, if you don't create the time to produce content and to market, then you really don't have a business. I mean, it really just becomes more of a little bit more of like a job. But it's not something you want to just hang your laurels on. You want to consistently, and especially if you're someone who has a really great message and a really great business and an amazing service to offer people, which again, if you're in the, especially like medical community, like you definitely have that. I always think like, don't play so small. You have an opportunity to reach so many people, and why stop there? So if you don't have the time, just consider you probably do, and maybe consider spending more of that time that you're spending on other things inside of marketing, and just watch what it does to your business. I think that it's allowed us to grow. I think it's allowed us to expand on who we are and what we are, and allow that mission and purpose to just really flourish. So I think, again, I probably to some degree existed in this middle world where, something was kind of a done with you type of program. And I'm a very independent person in a good way. I can be pretty autonomous and like, hey, if you give me some information and you give me a little bit of a framework, like I can really do a lot of damage with that in a good way. And so again, even for my own business, like I pretty well maximized on that front. And quickly recognize like, okay, there must be another rung to this because, there was just clearly things that I still didn't quite understand or quite know, how I would implement that, especially by myself, right? I have an amazing team of employees and again, other contractors, but okay, I finally got this under wraps. I've got my head around it. I've got this, basic systems in place. I've become more comfortable maybe on camera and speaking on camera and things like that. Now I need to take it up a notch. And again, maybe have someone who's an expert step in and start actually giving me even more of that really, really high touch concierge type feel guidance where it's like, okay, wow, this is worth every penny. Like I'm clearly going to get really good results here because I've already seen really good results, previously just kind of even doing it a little bit on my own, but with some help. So I think that next evolution of, okay, great, I've mastered this part. Now moving into the next part, you finally get to have that like a little bit more one-on-one with Evan and the video systems program. Like that really, really is the, where you want to end up at some point, because it really starts to push your content and I think the way you even present yourself to like another level.